podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Julie Scanlon, and in this new series I'm excited to introduce you to coaches, experts and changemakers who share their insights on coaching women in the context of advancing systemic change. Our aim is to inspire and educate you to contribute to shaping to a more gender-equal world. It's my pleasure in this episode to speak with Christina Hughes, founder and CEO of Women's Space, a coaching, leadership, development and change management consultancy which supports the academic sector. We touch on how women may feel like they are carrying the weight of the world in careers that assume that there is nothing going on outside of work. We talk about how careers seen as vocational can create an over-identification with work, and also that testifying and sharing enabled by coaching can help unravel socialised assumptions and build to support organisational change. Hello everyone, it's my great pleasure today to be with you for another episode of the Coaching Women podcast. Particularly a great pleasure to welcome Christina Hughes as my guest. I'm going to allow Christina to let us know a little bit about herself in a moment, but in essence, she is the founder and CEO of Women's Space, which is a coaching, leadership, development and change management consultancy, which works with the academic sector, particularly women in the academic sector, of course. So, Christina, really appreciate you taking some time to have this conversation with us today, but I know it's going to be an engaging conversation from the chats that we've had before. So I wonder if you would just start off by letting listeners know a little bit about your background, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. It's an absolute delight to be here. So I've had a very long career in universities, and part of that long career was a very long career in one university in particular. So I'm a University of Warwick graduate, did my undergrad, my postgrad, and ended up as PVC there, and then moved on to Sheffield Hallam, and then latterly to Kent. Mm-hmm. But just to add, before that, I also had a career, and because I was a late starter, so I used to work. I left school at 16, and used to work in offices. And then ended up working for Birmingham Local Authority, and thanked them hugely because they gave me day release. Tells you how long ago it was. Gave me day release to go to what was then Birmingham Poly to do some work, and that reignited me wanting to get back into education.
Fantastic! I didn't know that you went to Birmingham Poly because so did I. That's where I did my undergraduate many years ago, and it was Birmingham Poly. Now Birmingham City for listeners that don't for younger listeners that don't recognise that.
That's true. Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's something nice little bit of resonance that didn't come up. So thanks for sharing that. And can you tell us a little bit about your motivation for setting up Women's Space and what kind of work that you do under that organisation?
So you can imagine in these kinds of roles, in any role really in university, it's full on, constant. And when I finished my contract at Kent, I decided to take a year out, or at least some time out before jumping back in again. And it was one of those moments where I was thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And there's a sort of now become a common anecdote that I tell, which is I was sat watching Gardener's World one Friday evening, and the name Women's Space popped in my head. And so I Googled it to see if the domain name had gone.
As we do these days.
And it hadn't with the hyphen. And that was it. It just kind of gave me focus. It gave me actually a framework. It's an odd thing to say, but it gave me a framework for, setting up Women's Space and doing the work I'm doing. but in that period of sort of what I always call gestation, when you're in those big transitions, there's a lot of thinking. You're just gestating, really. Yeah. And in that period, I was clear about the world I knew, which was universities. My whole history has always been around women and gender work. So that combination of my experience, the world I knew, and knowing there's a need was always bubbling away, probably why women's space popped up when it popped up in my head, when you leave your kind of, unconscious to work on something.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that thought of gestation. That's exactly, it's that, when it happens when you're on a walk, when you're in a shower or, washing up or something, all these little cogs. So it's gentle. It's not necessarily sitting down in front of a screen and kind of planning that for 2 hours. And that gestation really kind of clicks in.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there your work was already, you worked around gender and you worked around the position of women in your academic expertise was around that area as well. Is that right?
Yes. So I'm a professor of women and gender. I still publish actually in that area. And so that's always been since I was an undergraduate, when I kind of got into women's studies courses, took them when I was doing my degree. And my PhD was on step families, but of course the parts I was interested in were the kind of wicked stepmother, not quite so wicked stepfather kinds of analyses of what was going on. So it's always been there through my whole academic career.
Yeah. So it was natural when you transitioned out of the space to remain in the space around that kind of area, of course, and just having that, the theoretical and conceptual as well as practical lens on what you offer now through women's space is so valuable. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do with women's space, so like how you do support people who come to you?
Okay, so I offer coaching, executive coaching and mentoring. I run programs in universities. So I'm just completing one I've done at the University of Bath, where they've been interested in, supporting women to be promoted. And, so I do those kinds of things. I offer consultancy. And also I have a kind of webinar series, which I run each year. And, I'm experimenting with it. And I think that's quite interesting. So this year we ran, I think from January onwards, actually we've run about 6 or 7 monthly lunchtime webinars.
Okay.
Which are just, are open and which have been an absolute joy, but also incredibly insightful, because this is one of the things I've come to reflect on since I set up Women's Space. And that is that, so I was, as a provost at Hallam, a DVC at Kent, I knew all the stuff that the university was doing around supporting, its staff, academic development, staff development, and so on. But what I've come to discover is it does not percolate down in the way that you assume. And so the webinars actually enable me to hear and to understand much more fully than I think I could have known when I'm talking to an individual, actually what women are dealing with before they've even left their house. And there's a phrase I'm using now, which is, we carry the weight of the world. So before you've even left the house, if you've got children or family care, that's all needs sorting out. But, it goes from that to worrying about what you're going to wear at a particular meeting where you feel you're going to be on the spot, to if you're menopausal, to be thinking, am I going to be embarrassed today?
Yeah.
All of this stuff is running through women's heads before they've even set foot out of the door.
Yeah.
And that for me, because I've heard it in groups of women feels to me far more profound than if, Julie, I knew you were worrying about something you were doing tomorrow. And I think, just for me, those webinars have been really insightful in that kind of way.
Yeah, so an opportunity to really listen actively to those concerns and the sort of the holistic experiences that many of us have as women, with the additional pressures, or the particular pressures of a kind of a stereotyping and the kind of the gendered roles that we hold or feel that we should be holding sometimes as well. The weight of the world, the kind of the sense of that we're always women, and with that comes all of that, the sort of landscape of those concerns that pop up. So I guess in terms of talking a little about the academic sector, of course, which is where you support people with women's space, in terms of that academic context, what do you see as the kind of particular challenges that women experience in this sector, and how maybe that kind of some of this holistic stuff we've talked about kind of plays out, I suppose, in that space?
So I actually don't think women experience particularly different kinds of challenges. So the authority gap, where women are, treading a tightrope between being seen as too masculine and therefore a bitch, or too feminine and wimpy, that's common. I think it's the context, the operational context that is actually different in each industry. And that in and of itself creates particular kinds of concerns. So, for example, academic women who are, have to think about their productivity in incredible ways and fit that productivity. So research outputs or teaching evaluations, so imagine going to work and every day of your life, someone can make an evaluation of you and your work, that kind of thing. It is particular, I think, to working in a university. And of course, for those who work in a university, there are lots of kinds of status distinctions, lots of divides between different professional groups. Sometimes pathways are not clear for progression. So there are certain areas of work, particularly what we call the third space, where you're neither fully academic and you're neither fully a professional service person, and how you navigate those spaces. That's different in terms of career paths. Yeah. And of course, I think in whatever university you're working in, whether, that are described as research intensive or teaching intensive, research always has the status. So those people who specialize in teaching are always fighting, if you like, at one level for recognition. I mean, things are changing. I would say things are absolutely changing. But it's patchy.
Yeah, thank you. I think that something that you touched on there about the productivity levels that are expected and anticipated within that sector, and not to suggest that other sectors don't have that kind of feels like quite often a ramping up of expectations all of the time. But I guess for listeners not familiar with the sector, what are we particularly thinking about when we're talking about productivity in the academic space?
So if you think about the evaluation of research through what's called the Research Excellence Framework, then you're looking at particular qualities of research output, research income, and impact. So not only have you got to do the research and publish it in what's called quality journals or quality with quality publishers, you also have to bring in research monies more and more. That's important. And create impact. So what is the value? What difference has your work made? So simply across those three levels, that is an increase of what was expected 15, 20 years ago. And of course, because women also carry bulk of family care and there are different stages, then that impacts their career. So I would say the career model generally is still masculine. It assumes that you go to work and you progress in neat stages up a ladder. Yes, or you're available, but also that you're zero loaded. There's nothing else in your life. And both teaching and research are incredibly greedy of your time. I mean, there's no end to any of these. And similarly with teaching, then yes, you're evaluated through the National Student Survey. You're evaluated through what's called the Teaching Excellence Framework. So, there's a constant toing and froing between these two incredible domains. And that doesn't include the administration.
Yeah. The third element that is increasing in that kind of workload as well. Yeah. I mean, it's a lovely brief description of like what an academic workload might look like for people that aren't in the sector or haven't had experience, I think. And the productivity, something particular is there's no cutoff, as you say. These are greedy. All of it is greedy, the administrative, the research and the teaching. And because you have an element of, I'm going to say freedom in inverted commas, you're free and not free to manage your own time for the most part. That enables that greediness to really encroach unless people are very, very, very careful. And so this kind of, those tensions and almost impossibilities really of carrying out what you talked about is, you've already got the weight of the world and all of the potential responsibilities that, the caring responsibilities and family responsibilities, either upwards or downwards to children or kind of older parents, which, still does, the statistics show us, fall with women much more than it does men. So we have that kind of the squeeze on women's time and the expectations around us are just much more kind of very present when we kind of speak to women in the academic sector, I guess. And you mentioned there this sort of the perpetual evaluation. It's almost kind of there on a daily basis in terms of both your research and in terms of the teaching element as well, especially with the National Student Survey and the Teaching Excellence Framework. So I'm wondering what kind of that sort of perpetual evaluation, what kind of issues does that bring up for women that you might work with, do you see?
Well, stress in and of itself. Yeah. Especially in those periods where it's not possible to deliver either on either front or on all fronts. It depends on your kind of contract conditions. But it's a kind of, I would say there's a humming stress all the time. Yes. And at certain times that stress can feel a lot more powerful. So for example, if you think about the kind of 6-year cycle of the Research Excellence Framework, it's 6 years, So once you've got through one, right, then as time goes and you're feeling more and more that you haven't managed to deliver on what you're required to deliver or you'd hope to deliver, then of course that pressurizes. And of course the universities are monitoring this all the time, but that monitoring increases the closer you are to any of these deadlines. So these peaks of pressure and stress in the system are also impacting. The other thing is, what women generally have is a myself last syndrome. Yes, they, who's going to have the best cake? Well, I won't. You have it. Yes, I'll put my needs before everybody else's. So their own health, in that mix. So if you're facing two greedy institutions, which are work and family, Where does your own health, well-being, me time, whatever you might call it, fit into that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of thinking about it. You get kind of sandwiched in some respects, and that, the sense of the humming stress and the way that women are more socialized than men still to be that putting yourself last, to be the support, and to be kind of more reticent. We don't wish to kind of stereotype, but those stereotypes are out there, and the expectations are out there, which is how we kind of get funneled culturally to sort of, adapt or adjust to those roles. And if we, or people kind of fight those roles, and kind of has that, which can create its own tension, I guess, as well. So there's that assumption that there's nothing going on outside of the workspace that this sector has, I guess, in other sectors, kind of the corporate world, kind of finance. We also get some of that greediness, where there's the expectation of the, 72-hour week and so forth, and it's the expectation you've got nothing going on, and you are just showing up for work, and kind of that's it, and that's sort of ever present and always on, part of something that's really been brought wholesale into universities in the last sort of decade, 20 years or so, with the various evaluation measures in particular. And so I guess, I hear this when I'm coaching women academics as well, and that sense of being, it can almost kind of create a feeling of almost a sort of lost identity. It's like, who am I in this space? And you're so putting that first and putting that first and putting that first, that yourself goes into actually, hang on a minute, who am I? What am I doing? What am I doing with my career? What am I doing with my life? It's women that I coach in that sector particularly have to sort of, get to a point in their career, and it's like, hang on a minute, where am I in this? What am I doing? How have I got here? Does that resonate with you as well, and some of the clients that you work with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That just taking some time out to think about what you might want, or what you might need. It's incredibly powerful if you do it. But creating the time for it is very, very hard.
Yeah.
And just asking the question, what do you need? Can cause someone to think, I don't know.
Yeah. And how powerful that is to ask that question, and for the person then to realize, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then, it's a kind of a step forward for that realization. That can be really something that the power of the coaching space can offer to the individuals who haven't been able to take that space. And I've also, sometimes working with clients in that sector, it's like they can feel a bit guilty about taking the space, about using the space for themselves, because it's so ingrained into us. Like, I haven't got time. Can't spend 90 minutes talking to someone about my own development or me, and that. But that sort of, it can feel a little. Sometimes people use that kind of self-indulgent to me, which just gives us an extraordinary insight into those pressures and the humming stresses people feel they need to be on the hamster wheel. I was trying to think what the metaphor is, and that taking time off the hamster wheel, stopping it, maybe even getting off it for a 90-minute slot every now and again, feels like it's almost like kind of having a long bath or something. It's that kind of sense that it's an indulgence, and yet sort of necessary at the same time, because we cannot keep that kind of productivity level up. So it's interesting when you talk about the sense of really here, it's like the expectations of the role, which are kind of limitless, don't allow for anything else, don't allow for anything outside of it. So there's something there. I think when we spoke before, we talked about how it's like your identity kind of gets a little bit lost, or your identity sort of, it doesn't fit in this template of what you're kind of supposed to do. There's a sort of template way of progressing on that academic track, whether that's kind of research or teaching. So it's, I mean, what is the role of coaching in here? What can coaching do to help women, I guess, assess that and sort of evaluate that and where they are?
I think it's about disentangling some of that. So you can go two ways with that. One, you can over-identify with your professional role, which can signal dangers in and of itself, because people are passionate about their research and teaching, for example, if you're an academic, and their values are wrapped up in what they're doing, and their identities are wrapped up in it. So that sort of, and of course, being an academic used to be described as a vocation. It wasn't a job, right? It was a way of life. So that opens you up for losing a sense of another self in that. But you've also got the opposite end, which is many people in universities are recruited from practice or from the professions. So their background is not a classic, stereotypical, this is what a boffin looks like, for example. And therefore that sense of dislocation where you don't quite fit is happening. So if you think about that as sort of two ends of a continuum, absolutely fully immersed and losing a sense of any other self, and I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be here. Just being able to unravel that, or maybe what Brené Brown calls rumbling, just sort of working on some of what's going on here and thinking about, actually thinking about a situation in that kind of way. And I actually think one of the gifts of coaching is providing frameworks for thinking, because for me, having a framework I can think within, I find personally very empowering. Think, okay, so where am I on that continuum then? Well, where and what are the impacts of this for me? Where do I want to be?
Yeah. Offering a framework for thinking is a really nice way of reflecting upon what a coaching space can give, I think, to help people get some clarity of kind of what's been happening and kind of how am I doing? How have I ended up here? And as you say, from whichever kind of route that you've taken into academia, that sort of the sense of the vocation is very much still there in that the traditional you've got here through the hard slog of, bachelor's, master's, PhD, whole load of publications expected alongside all of that these days, impact expected, great teaching evaluations before you even get a job. So there's so much kind of extra time that is being put in those in the early stages, and that doesn't stop. So it's like when you were talking about it, I was thinking it's like it's kind of like going into a convent. It is that sort of sense of you go through these processes, and it kind of exemplifies your dedication in inverted commas, and then you get into the convent and you're expected to almost have nothing else but to keep visibly demonstrating this dedication. It's the first time I've thought about the convert analogy, but you tapping onto that. But then we have those the people that are coming from professional practice, who we sometimes see. So for listeners, not kind of, we might be thinking about, engineers who've been working in, in industry that would move into academia, or we might be thinking about creative writers, on the kind of, so they've had careers or have careers and they move in, or they partially sort of keep that professional practice going and partially come into academia. And there are sort of then expectations on those to publish in certain ways, to sort of have particular kinds of impacts as well. So it has its particular demands, which are, I guess, there's something unique about all careers, but there's something about that, about fitting. There's something very much about fitting and about a template, which is kind of coming into my mind quite a lot around those expectations. And in kind of coaching, academics, for me, what comes up sometimes is that, well, what else could I do? What else could I be? Because they're full and, they're in the convent, they've got the habit on.
Yeah.
And to take that off is, who else am I? What's underneath that? And you touched on the sense of it being a kind of very, very values driven, usually, reason that people go into the academic sphere. So that brings in that concept of identity very highly, very much so. And you mentioned there that sort of the kind of rumbling, using that term from Brené Brown. If I've heard that term, but you want to just sort of articulate what that means if people haven't heard it before.
Well, I always think about rumbling as being able to just work on a few things that are actually important. And she talks a lot about vulnerability and how we can open up with others what we might think, feel, or care about as acts of vulnerability, because a lot of workplaces are performative. You put on the mask and you turn up and you do the job. They're not necessarily, spaces where you can actually talk about some of the things that are really important to you. And, if we go back to the webinars, I think, women talking about having miscarriages and not saying a word at work, is an example to me about how, and for lots of good reasons. One, you don't want to open up that personal stuff. It's not appropriate. You don't want people to know, it's private to you, but also, it's career damaging that, they're going to get pregnant. So they're not going to be interested, are they? They're not committed. Then, they're not ambitious. So all of those reasons why you don't speak at work. But imagine the person who's experienced that and what they must be experiencing at work. Yeah. It comes back to me for that kind of weight of the world thing, because for me, I would scale up that one or two people who've said that and think, in every workplace across the world, in whatever industry, there are women who've had that experience and are not saying a word. And how many women can that possibly be?
Yeah.
Right. So I always understand rumbling in that sense of providing a container, a safe space that you can, you are able to talk about some of these other things that are really important for creating great workplaces where we do accept that life is happening to all of us. We're not just automatic workers who turn up to do a job.
Yeah, we're not just the human resources.
Yes, that's true.
Like a photocopier as a resource. Yeah, that's really, that's so touching about the numbers of women that, miscarriage, unfortunately, is so common, but that women are carrying that grief with them and yet unable to speak, feel quite unable to speak in the workplace or at with colleagues and kind of be open about that for all of the things that you mentioned. Yeah, because it is such a common experience. It's like how might workplaces actually just be able to adapt or adjust to that without someone needing to expose themselves? But how might that happen? And that's something for human resources professionals to think about, isn't it? So it's and so at the moment, so sort of these more confidential and kind of private spaces can afford that for those things that are rumbling and some really big impactful things. As you've talked about there. And I feel when we're sort of moving conversation in there into the sort of how our work with coaches, with individuals and perhaps groups as you work with in the webinars, how that kind of sits with the need for organizational change, for change on a bigger level, for change in the sort of systems and structures. Like how do those things sit together with one another, do you think, if they do?
I think, first of all, it depends on the change you want to see. So for me, and I don't ram feminism down people's throats, you know, I mean, I'm open about my standpoints, right? But it's not something I'm going to bring up in every conversation at every turn, because I think people have to come to this in and of themselves. But so I think, you know, it depends on the change you want to see. So for me, those webinars, and one of the things I've learned from those is the importance of both testifying and sharing, so that actually you realize you are not the only one, that you know, that it's not just it's what there's a sociologist called C. Wright Mills who talks about private troubles becoming public issues. So understanding that my private trouble actually has a resonance more broadly, and of course he's talking about then it becomes a policy, etc. But we see it with the menopause now, where you know, when I went through the menopause, you didn't tell a soul, and if you had a hot flush at work, you were, oh my goodness, absolutely embarrassed. At least now people, and there are policies being developed, so making those private troubles more public, for me, is a way in which you can change. And the more people are aware of that, the more they can lobby and ask for change or see the need for change in that webinar space. At a personal level, in a coaching space, then I think it's actually a lot of coaching is about unraveling your own socialized assumptions. So there's you know, you all know something like self-limiting beliefs. So that we all believe that this, you know, women can't be ambitious, right? And there can be penalties for some women who demonstrate being ambitious because they fall off on one side of the tightrope, you know. But all women won't ever get into these kinds of jobs. Women don't get promoted, those kinds of things. That in a coaching space, you can create those personal changes that enable people to think, I can do something. I can be something that I really want to be.
That's wonderful. I mean, those socialized expectations can be so strong, and we've kind of imbibe them because they're in the air, they're part of the wallpaper of our growing up, you know, and that sense of a coaching space being able to just open out for some opportunities, for some rethinking of that, for where have these frames come from? Actually, do I want to hold these frames in my head anymore and kind of live according to them? And so some of those are, well, the cliche terms, kind of light bulb moments that we can see with coaching clients it can be so very rewarding to sort of sit with people in that space as they're seeing it. And you mentioned Mills there on the private becoming public. If we, in a sort of a more group situation where you recognize that coaching space can afford that recognition, the moments of recognition. And then the lovely example of menopause, where we are, you know, this started off with women talking about it amongst themselves privately, if they dared, but sharing experiences. And what we're seeing, you know, in the last few years of that translating into recognition, you know, presumably because there are more women of kind of my kind of age going through exactly like that right now, you know, because we're in positions where it's like, hang on a minute, you know, we need to be actually supporting something that pretty much every woman will go through at sort of certain period in her life. And that in itself is making me think about, I mean, you said you try not to push feminism down people's throats, likewise, but, you know, the sort of the feminist lens that you bring to your work is, you know, it enables that space and that very kind of those very delicate conversations to happen because you've got that awareness. And it's also reminding me of, you know, the old phrase from the 70s, the feminist phrase, the personal is political. And when we're looking at that, what's just the lovely example of menopause policies and stuff, that sort of has been recognised, women's very personal experiences bringing about some organisational shifts and changes. More work is needing to be done around it, but it's happening, isn't it? And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And likewise, it's making me think about consciousness raising groups that women, from the women's liberation movement. If people don't know what that means, it is the where women got together and talked about things that were very personal to them, but recognizing through the sharing of experiences that actually it's not an individual issue. So something like menopause, for example, or, in other contexts, kind of, violence and so forth, domestic violence and things. So women use that as a method to raise their awareness of what was going on. And what we're doing when we're talking about sharing those personal experiences, either in a one-to-one coaching sometimes, or in, like having that kind of witnessing that happens in a one-to-one coaching or in a group, kind of echoes that sort of model and recognises the importance of being listened to. The conversation is just stimulating me in all sorts of different directions. So that wasn't even leading to a question. I apologise.
No, but Julie, being listened to is the most profound act we could do for anybody. And really being listened to is unbelievable. What a gift that is to give to anybody in the world. Yeah,
it is. And what the coaching space offers. And you will have it. Any of us that are coaches will have seen what the value is of being listened to and witnessing people see what that experience is like as well. It's a real kind of privilege of coaching, I think. Okay, so that's quite a nice way to begin to wrap up, Christina, on what's been just a fascinating conversation, I think, and just really learning about the valuable work that you're doing and at the moment has just been really, I guess, encouraging to think about how things are fitting together in terms of making a change on a bigger picture sometimes as well. So I wondered if, as we do sort of move towards a close, if people have been interested, like to get in touch with you to follow up or inquire more about your work, how might they do that? The links will go in the show notes for people that want to click on, but if they're listening out and about, how might they get in touch with you?
So you can go on to women-space.co.uk or you can email me at christina@women-space.co.uk and you'll find all the resources and everything you want on there. And if you go on the website, we have a subscriber button. Subscribe to Women's Space. You'll get my bonkers newsletter, which has all kinds of things in it. We have what we call the Boudica Collective, which is the Women's Space Agony Aunts. So we answer your career questions or probably any other question you might want to send in. We always have a little animal spot at the end for people's pets.
I love this.
So on. So there's a whole raft of stuff in the newsletter. And of course, you'll then get all the events that are coming up.
Fantastic.
I try not to badger people with loads of mailings.
But if you've got a promise with a pet at the end, that's going to make people read to the end.
Well, I'm always seeking people's pictures of their pets, always.
I'll have to send one in of my cat, Thomas.
Oh, no, definitely. No, that's a deal. Right. That is a deal, Julie. Right, Thomas. Okay.
He'll love it.
We will feature him. Yeah.
Oh, Christina, it's been fantastic speaking with you. It really has. I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to say in these final few moments. There may or may not be, or anything that any message that you'd like to give to listeners as we leave.
I just want to reinforce the point that we're more than one half of the world. And we really should be far better represented in that world than how the world is at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. We certainly should. Thank you so much, Christina.
It's a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really delighted that you were free and available to come and speak with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.